Steve Bannon pulled a Scaramucci. He called up Robert Kuttner at the American Prospect, that is a progressive magazine, and talked to him. He didn't say it was off the record. Now, Steve Bannon is a politically savvy guy. He's dealt with the media forever. He ran a media organization, Breitbart. He knows that if you're going to talk off the record, you have to say off the record. And he didn't. So I don't know what the hell is going on in his head. I don't know if this is him psychologically just going, forget it. He's already besieged, and Donald Trump did not enthusiastically back him the other day. There's calls for his firing. But he calls into Kuttner and then says amazing things, some of which are against Trump's wishes and some of which are against specific people, so let me get to it. First, he ostensibly called to talk about China and North Korea because he thought Kuttner was on the same side of him when it comes to trade negotiations with China. I don't think that he understands where Kuttner stands. And even if Kuttner were to agree with him on trade issues, as he explained in the piece in the American Prospect, and we'll have a link below, you should read it, he certainly does not agree with Steve Bannon on anything else and is not his ally. So at a bare minimum, this was incredibly foolish on Steve Bannon's part. So on that issue, he says, there's no military solution to North Korea's nuclear threats, forget it. Until somebody solves the part of the equation that shows me that 10 million people in Seoul don't die in the first 30 minutes from conventional weapons, I don't know what you're talking about. There's no military solution here. They got us. Now that is directly contradictory of Donald Trump's rhetoric and policy. Oh boy, that'll get you in trouble. Now, on the other hand, it's one of the rare sensible things I've ever heard Steve Bannon say. It's a relief to know that he recognizes that millions of people would die in Seoul, South Korea, if we were to attack North Korea. So I hope if Donald Trump is thinking of attacking North Korea, along with the generals and everyone else in the administration, Steve Bannon says to him, hey, knucklehead, don't do it, we'll lose millions of people, I hope. He says, but that's not the important part and that's not the main issue. He says the main issue is, quote, the economic war with China is, quote, everything. So now I think that in some ways we do need to get tougher on China. On the other hand, starting an economic war with them sounds like a disastrous idea. But do these guys look like they're going to be able to be tempered and sagely figure out what the right balance is so that we get a better deal from China without starting a trade war? It certainly doesn't appear to be the case. Okay, well now we get on to politics inside the White House. They say that you have all these enemies in the national security organizations, in the Treasury Department, among the top advisors to the president. He says on this issue about how he's going to do this ploy to start a trade war with China, he says, quote, oh, they're wetting themselves. What is with all the phallic references with Trump's advisors? Okay, that is not going to go over well, but he's about to make it worse. When they say, well, how about the people in foreign policy who don't agree with you? He says, quote, I'm changing out people at East Asian Defense. I'm getting Hawks in. I'm getting Susan Thornton, acting head of East Asian and Pacific Affairs, out at state. You have the power to do that? I thought the president does that. So you know how they sometimes mockingly call him President Bannon, which definitely gets under Trump's skin? Well, this is why they say that, because he calls up reporters like, here's who I'm going to fire and not fire at the White House and on the foreign policy team. That puts you in trouble, dog. Jesus, this was incredibly stupid. If he did it on purpose, maybe this is three-dimensional chess. Because in regular chess, it looks like he's about to get, he's about to get checkmated and thrown out of the office. But we'll see. Trump hasn't fired him yet. About the fights, he says within the White House, he says that's a fight. I fight every day here. We're still fighting. There's Treasury and National Economic Council Chair Gary Cohn and Goldman Sachs lobbying. Again, here there's a kernel of truth in what Steve Bannon is saying. Gary Cohn is from Goldman Sachs. In fact, he was the COO of Goldman Sachs. Are they lobbying to get tax cuts for Goldman Sachs? Yes. Are they lobbying to get special favors to the bankers, Goldman Sachs, and the financial industry? Yes. Is it smart to say that you are going to try to get the president's National Economic Council chair fired? to a liberal reporter? No, that is not smart. That is likely to get you fired. Okay, he says, on all these issues, we've got to do this. The president's default position is to do it, but the apparatus is going crazy, don't get me wrong. It's like every day. So continuing to talk about the fight and saying that the president is on his side. We'll see about that. He said the Democrats, the longer they talk about identity politics, I got them. I want them to talk about racism every day. If the left is focused on race and identity and we go with economic nationalism, we can crush the Democrats. Unfortunately, there's a kernel of truth in that statement as well, which is that economic nationalism is not necessarily the correct economic policy, but it does appeal to people. Unfortunately, it has deep appeal. But the Democratic Party is still going, no, Goldman Sachs is great, and we probably would have picked Gary Cohn too. And they're supporting guys like Steve Mnuchin, who's the Treasury Secretary. It's a disastrous idea. And the reality is economic nationalism, whether it's right or wrong, can be politically popular. Unfortunately, he's right about that. And now identity politics, are you kidding me? They're the guys who are, he's proudly the father of the alt-right movement. What is that? That's identity politics. But at the same time, if that's the only thing you use on the right or the left, it's not necessarily a winning strategy. Now, when it comes to the white nationalists that were down in Charlottesville, he has very surprising opinion on that, if you believe him. He says ethno-nationalism, it's losers. It's a fringe element. I think the media plays it up too much, and we got to help crush it. Help crush it more. And then he adds, these guys are a collection of clowns. Now that might be a mistake of a different order. That's Steve Bannon losing his own base. Hey Steve, if the white nationalists aren't your base, who is? If you think that you have a base, forget Trump, that you have a base of support in the country that is outside of the alt-right movement, I think you're in for a rude awakening. So apparently his real opinion is we use these white nationalists who are clowns to get political votes. We don't really believe that. There's an upside to that. If you really believe this, he's not as racist as he appears to be. He just uses racism for his own benefits. I don't think that makes it much better, but it's also going to piss off the racists. So now you don't have many allies left. Now we go to the reaction from inside the White House, and Axios has that. One advisor said it's Anthony Scaramucci all over again. Indeed. Jonathan Swan and Axios explains further. The result is not good for Bannon, who's already under pressure with colleagues lined up against him and a president who agrees with him ideologically, but tells associates he thinks Bannon is a leaker. If the president didn't like you because you're leaking, oops, this was a pretty bad leak. Here is a colleague of Steve Bannon who says he's not his enemy, but he says, boy, since Steve apparently enjoys casually undermining US national security, I'll put this in terms he'll understand. This is DEFCON 1 level bad. And finally, Swan says, the piece gives Bannon's enemies ammunition at a time he's extraordinarily vulnerable. They've been saying he's a leaker, a self-promoter, President Bannon, etc. This interview plays right into their hands. So this part of the soap opera is not over yet, but Steve Bannon has apparently done grave damage to himself inside the White House. Now, I don't know if these are his real opinions or if he was in his own mind doing some sort of jujitsu move. I think he might have just jujitsu'd himself right out of the White House. And I hope to God he is, because whether he's actually racist or just wants to get racist voters on his side, doesn't make much of a difference to me. I want him out and I want that ideology out. Look, the Trump White House is a disaster. It's a basket of deplorables, to borrow a term. But among those deplorables, Steve Bannon is among the worst. So can't wait for him to get fired. I don't know if he will. Him being a racist is not going to get him fired. Him trying to appeal to white nationalists is not going to get him fired. Him wanting to start a trade war with China is not going to get him fired. him pretending to be the president and talking about how he's going to get people out and put people in, that'll get him fired. So we'll see. We'll see if Trump understands this enough. And I'm sure they put it in a folder for him. And since it's got his name on it, he's going to pay attention and see if he takes action on Bannon. Can't wait. If you like the Young Turks, you'll love Young Turks membership. tytnetwork.com/join.